Hi guys, I've got a new watercolour palette and today I'm going to fill it with all my favourite colours. You may have seen an earlier video of mine here on YouTube where I talked about my watercolour palettes and the features that I like them to have. I said at the end of that video that my ideal palette would be a large round ceramic one that had sloping wells and a lid, and I could put it on a Lazy Susan and spin it around on my painting table. Well, some of you told me to talk to Robert from Robax Engineering in the US, and I did. I reached out to him and he very kindly designed this palette for me. So thank you very much for telling me about him. Now this palette, it's not ceramic, which is one of the features I like, but it is large, it's round, it has sloping wells, it has a lid to keep the dust off, and it has a spinning stand that I can sit it on. So I'm completely thrilled with it, and today I'm going to fill it with all the colours that I use most often and I'll try it out. So because the palette is round, I thought I'd put my colours in it like it was a colour wheel. So I printed off a colour wheel from the internet just to guide me, and I wrote all the colours that I use most often just around the outside of the colour wheel. So that's how I thought I'd position them in the palette. I like to keep my paints in a fishing tackle box. It just allows me to separate the colours from one another. So I thought I'd start with my favourite yellow, and that's Winsor Lemon. So I just popped that on and I went from there. This is the end of a tube, so I'll just get as much of it out as I can. So then I just continued around with the rest of the colours. Now when I'm putting the paints in the palette, I put it at the top of the wells, or the highest point on each well. And I'll tell you why I do that a little later in the video. There's a ridge at the top of the wells that stops the paint from slipping down deeper into the well, so I'm just putting the paint above that ridge. I don't need to put a lot of paint in my palette either because I don't use a lot of paint. The paintings I do are usually for my online classes and they're not that big. Now all these colours I've listed in the description of the video for you, just in case you're curious. I thought I'd use this palette for all my Winsor and Newton colours. I also have a metal palette where I've got most of my colours at the moment. I thought I'd clean that out and then I'll just use that for all of my Daniel Smith colours. So that way I'll have one palette for one brand and another palette for another brand. And that just helps me when I'm teaching my classes as well. Okay, so now that I've got all the colours in the palette, I've got a little blue book here that I keep beside my desk when I'm painting. And I can write all the colours in there in the order that I've put them in the palette, just so that I know which colour's which, and when I need to replace it, I know what colour to put where. Some artists use a permanent marker and they write on the outside of their palette so that they know what colours are where, but I think that this will work better for me just until I remember how I've positioned them on the palette. This palette also has a mixing tray in the middle that you can take out and clean. I believe you can also fit a ceramic plate in there if you prefer ceramic over plastic. So here's one reason why I like palettes with sloping wells. This palette here I use when I'm teaching because I can show my students how I put the paint on the palette. Now this little palette also has sloping wells just like my new one. I put the paint on the highest point of the well and I give the paint a squirt of water. So then when I'm painting and I want really light colour or a pale wash, I use the watery paint that's pooled at the bottom of the well. Now, because the paint that I squirted out isn't sitting in water, it goes hard after a little while, and that's when I like to use it. Because what I can do is I can wipe my wet brush over the pigment that's gone hard, and that gives me this beautiful rich dark colour when I want it. So back to my new palette, and because this is what I normally do, I just took my spray bottle and I squirted some of the paints with the water. But I forgot to take into account those little ridges that are there to stop the paint from slipping down into the water. And what happened was that water pulled up the top with the pigment, which is not what I wanted. I want that paint to go hard, like I said. I don't want it to remain all gluggy and sticky while I'm painting. So I thought about it for a moment, and then I went hunting in the bathroom for a pipette. So I decided with this palette, instead of squirting the paint with the spray bottle, I'll just use the pipette to put the water at the bottom of each well. And then I can use my brush just to mix the paint into the water. So now I can use the paint at the top when I want really dark pigment, or when I want a paler wash, I'll just use this watery paint at the bottom. Now the other reason I like to use a palette with sloping wells is for when I mix paint. Now I don't mix a lot of colours, but when I do, I'll take one colour from my palette and I'll put it on my mixing palette. And then without washing my brush, because I don't want to dilute the mixture that I'm mixing up, I'll pick up the other colour with the dirty brush. And then I put that into the mixing palette. So then I might want some more of the blue again without washing my brush. And what happens when you do this is you tend to dirty one colour with another on your palette. So if that happens, because this palette has got the sloping wells, I can just clean out the well with a tissue. And then I can just refresh the well with some clean paint. The other thing you can do with all that sludgy paint that pools at the bottom of the wells is you can mix them together and use it to mix up your greys and your browns and your other earthy colours. So I'll zoom out here on this kookaburra painting and you can see how I'm using the palette. The wells are deeper than what I'm used to. The wells on the ceramic palettes that I use aren't anywhere near as deep as this, but that's okay. I don't think that it will bother me too much. It's just a case of getting used to them. I can fit my larger brush down in them, so that's good. I like the fact that I can spin it around to get another colour as well. I find on my metal palette when I'm using that I'm always stretching over it to reach the colours that are further away from me. I also like the mixing tray in the middle of the palette as well. Now this mixing tray or mixing plate can be removed to clean it, which is good. Or you can replace it with a ceramic plate if you prefer to mix on a ceramic plate. So I think this palette's going to be very useful to me. One thing that some artists do is they don't completely fill their palettes with paint. They like to leave room for other colours that they might use in the future. I've been painting for a while, so I've filled this one with the colours that I use more than any others. So all of the things that I've told you in this video suit me and my style of painting. It may not suit you. You might do a lot of mixing, you might work on larger paintings than I do, you might not use as many colours as I do. I just wanted to share my ideas with you. Now before I go, I should tell you the size of the palette. This one has 24 paint wells and it's about 40 centimetres in diameter. So you'd need to be working somewhere where you've got plenty of room around you, which I do, thankfully. I love my new palette. I think it's wonderful to use. If you want to know where I got it from, I've put a link in the description to this video. So thank you for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and I'll see you next week with a new tutorial.